very turbulent point in our history. The threat of a global thermonuclear war between the United States and Russia has brought us closer to doomsday than ever before. As the existence of humanity now hangs in the balance, what's needed now more than ever is people standing up and declaring independence from the forces that choose to sink us to our demise.
To stand up against the pessimism that reeks in our culture, that plagues the minds of people, that has destroyed our society and our humanity. What's needed now more than ever is to regain the ability to think for ourselves once again. Instead of being divided between two opposing camps, both of which are equally wrong and totally inconsistent with what is really truthful, we seek to go outside those limits and engage in a process of dialogue with various minded people in politics, art, culture, and other subjects.
We do not believe in talking to people who share the same points of view as us, but with people that are sincere and have something productive to say on the current state of affairs in the world. And this can be anybody.
Today, we declare independence from the torchbearers and break our chains to seek out and find and talk with those who are also unafraid.
We declare independence from the tyranny of those who think they can control our thoughts and can force us to choose between what they present to us like shadows in a cave. That's why we are declaring independence.
Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. I'm usually not up this early. That's not true. I'm usually up much, much earlier, and I'm very excited about our guests. But before we go to our guests, I just want to hello, good morning. Wow, there's a morning audience. This is actually our first stream done in the morning before noon. Good morning. Wow, I'm very excited. We got people coming in this early. I was not expecting that. Yeah. So actually, we've had some exciting things happening. We published our first chapter in our documentary of Victoria Nuland, with more coming along the way. Patrons get early access, of course, and there is an exclusive event that is being done on Juan de Perea, which if you are a patron, you get exclusive discount to, which we'll be sending an email out after this show. So stay in tune for that. But today, I'm going to bring up our guest who runs Podcast by George, which is a show that's hosted by George H. Clark. He's a former farmer, truck driver, DJ, broadcast news reporter, publishing executive, and now a men's leagues hockey player in early retirement. And he's a fan favorite of mine because I'm this fan, and he's my favorite. He had me on his show after I had confronted some of these New York Times, LA Times, some of these head editors of people. And we're going to be bringing him up now. So, George.
Hello. Hi. How are you, my buddy, my pal, Jose Vega? How you guys doing?
Oh, we're doing good. This must be weird for you. You were telling us just before the show that you rarely ever guest on someone else's show. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't guest very often. I do a lot of shows. I mean, I host. I've had over 500 Podcast by George episodes with some real luminaries, in the independent left-wing media world. And I'm approaching my 5th year anniversary here in September. So that kind of gives you an idea of the volume of work that I do. And I really appreciate that intro that you gave me there, Jose. And I like to tell people I'm kind of maybe a socio-political petri dish. I'm a very interesting case, but my perspective on things, I think, is valuable. It's unique and it's valuable. I was a reporter. I'm a journalism trained and educated graduate of Drake University. I went into broadcasting back in the 1980s. I was working at WHO, the alma mater of Ronald Reagan. In the middle 80s, and I had to get out of the business because I was starving to death. But I got into it because of people like Daniel Ellsberg and the Pentagon Papers, or Robert Woodward, who's since, gone missing mostly, and his work on Watergate. And these were my heroes, and that's where I thought journalism was. And I got involved in the corporate world to make a living because I was starving to death in broadcasting. And I had to keep my head down politically because the owners of the companies that I worked for were right-wingers. I mean, I worked for a guy that was right of Glenn Beck, for God's sake. So I had to keep it really close to the vest. I didn't watch it as closely. And then as I approached retirement, I popped my head back up and looked around and said, where the hell is everybody? What is this? This is not what I left. Where's the left wing? Where's the liberal part of the sphere. Why aren't any of these people being platformed? What the hell? Where's Seymour Hersh, as Jose Vega says? And so, I'm going to start this show and I'm going to be a part of this little left-wing patchwork quilt of broadcasters that are giving voice to all of these heroes of mine, people that have been proven correct right down the line since I was in broadcasting back in the 80s. They've been right about all these wars. They've been correct, and they can't get a platform. They can't get on Meet the Press. They can't be seen or heard. Well, I'm going to do what I can to get the word out, and Jose Vega is a part of that. That's why you're on my show. So that's kind of an extension of my bio, but that's who I am, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing, Jose.
Well, George, I really appreciate hearing that because, I think you are jumping on the boat right on time as we have a new medium coming in with the internet and the accessibility of people who want something real, real news, or people, at least where people can actually think critically about the news, right? Tucker Carlson just did his show on Twitter, and he had 100 times the viewers he got on there that he normally would on Fox.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that just goes to show that the mainstream press and TV and cable news it's old news now. It's dying off, and people are turning on Podcast by George to see what you got going on, what truth tellers you got going on. And so, speaking of telling the truth, George, I wanted to talk about JFK and RFK.
Yeah.
And your general thoughts on it. I think you told me something about that you do believe there was a lone nut who actually killed Kennedy.
Yeah. And it's part of my criticisms of RFK. And I've got criticisms of most politicians. So, I mean, people don't need to get all alarmed about that. RFK, is he better than Biden? Is he better than Trump? Well, probably. But to me, that's like saying a sixth grader is better than a third grader. I mean, the things that everybody is jumping up and down about with RFK Juniors, to me, they're not extraordinary. He's got some good common sense ideas on some things, so I like him. But I'm really alarmed when people start talking about the CIA, as nefarious as it is, as many bad things as it's done, being responsible for killing President of the United States, not because I don't think they're capable, not because I don't think that they had a motive. I just don't think that they've done it. I'm reminded of Roger Waters when he was interviewed by that Smirkomish guy or whatever. I tell people, you need to read more. I mean, look deeply into this JFK situation. And if you want to talk about JFK or maybe even RFK to a certain extent, I would say, and I know I've heard you speak, Jose, I know that Seymour Hersh is a huge hero of yours, but if you don't know if you can't think of anything else regarding the JFK assassination, think of it this way. If there was a conspiracy, if the CIA killed John F. Kennedy, Seymour Hersh would have found it. He would have unearthed it. I mean, this would be the biggest story of his lifetime. Hell, it would be the biggest story of Podcast by George's lifetime. Dan Rather, Tom Brokaw, I mean, all of the Chris Hedges, all of these guys. If there was something there, if there was something to be found after all of these years, I guarantee you guys like that would have done it. They haven't been able to find it. It ain't there. Now, we can talk about all the particulars if you like, because I'm kind of a buff on it. I like talking about that stuff, but maybe that's the overarching thing. If it was there, you'd know it. Seymour Hersh would have told you.
Well, let me throw this at you then, and then kind of follow up with this.
Yeah.
We could go through the particulars. We could go through the magic bullet. We could go through,
Yeah.
The other angle, the grassy knoll, whatever. What do you think about the Kennedy files? Because there's talk of, that they should be, that RFK Jr. has said that he's going to release them all completely. Trump in an interview recently said, or he was asked, you said you were going to release these files when you became president, and then you didn't. What happened? And his response was, well, if you knew what was in them, you wouldn't want to release them either. So,
yeah. Well,
what do you make of that?
Couple of things. I think it's a cover your ass thing with these intelligence agencies. I don't think they'd want to reveal what the real conspiracy was, or the real black mark against them is, which is they fell down on the job. They're absolutely worthless. I wouldn't trust those guys to guard or watch my neighbor's dog, for God's sake. And they've tried to prevent people all these years for knowing how inept they are. And then, of course, they don't want people to know that they're concealing this from people, and it's all the same. Now, I have Gerald Posner on my show quite regularly. He wrote one of the definitive works on the Kennedy assassination called Case Closed. And again, he's an independent journalist. He's the kind of guy, he's Pulitzer nominated. He's not quite Seymour Hersh stature, but he's pretty damn close. If he could find, and he would like to find, trust me, evidence of something other than Lee Harvey Oswald committing this assassination by himself, Gerald Posner would have done it. And he's the first one to tell you, nah, I looked at this thing up one side and down the other. I don't think anybody but Oswald did it. But did the FBI cover its ass? Yeah. Did the CIA cover its ass? Yeah. Do I want to see these records, these archival records brought forward? Absolutely. Now, one caveat to that is people need to understand that a lot of these records that are yet to be revealed and that are getting revealed at times, if you look at them, what they are files or records that had been released previously, but they were redacted. They were blacked out, and they were intel agencies basically covering their asses. That's what they were doing with their operatives and their offices and locations and people that weren't supposed to be where they were at and places we weren't supposed to have, intel. So they've blacked that stuff out. Well, they're unredacting that. And these records are coming out, but they're not telling you anything new about the John Kennedy assassination and a conspiracy involving anybody other than Oswald, really. And now that isn't to say that in the future, with what's left, that it wouldn't be revealed. And I'd be the first one to say, yeah, bring it on. Force them, guys. Should have been done 20 or 30 years. I'm a big open disclosure guy. I mean, I'm a transparency guy. I don't believe virtually anything should be secret except, troop movements and shipping lanes and times of war and shit like that were, part of the original Espionage Act. And that's why I'm so opposed to Julian Assange being in the predicament that he's in. Get this stuff out there. Nobody's ever harmed by it, and we're all benefited by it. And that's the way that I feel about the records you're talking about.
China?
Yeah, well, George, I'd like you to go into a bit of the nit and gritty and the details, which actually points to Oswald doing this. I'll be honest, I'm not too aware of the evidence. Most of my vision of the assassination comes from Oliver Stone's film JFK, and the documentation which Jim Garrison did when he was Attorney General at that time. So I don't know as much as I should, and it's great that we have someone like you on who's actually gone through this to talk about it. So why don't you tell us a bit of the details about the case?
Yeah, honest to God, and I've had Gerald Posner on my show with that book, and we didn't talk about it as much as we're going to, but I'll try to sum it up. And I'm glad you're giving me time here, Jose, that we've got an hour to talk today, because this will take a minute or two. But basically,
Hold on, wait, just before you go.
Okay.
I just want to let you know. So, I'm very much. I do believe this was a conspiracy by the government. A lot of my audience think so too.
Oh, I get it.
So I just also want to put out this disclaimer. My ideal audience is people. Whenever I bring on a guest, that half of my audience is angry and the other half is happy. That's my ideal audience. I want people to be exposed to other ideas that they may not agree with.
That's perfect, man.
So
I mean,
anyway, that's also go ahead. Yeah, go for it.
Matt Taibbi would be proud of you. I mean, that's what we're missing so much in American discourse and in our media. We're getting this one-sided perspective. But here it is. I mean, we could talk for hours about it. I'll try to sum it up in a couple of minutes. But the key to the Kennedy assassination, JFK I'm talking about here, is Lee Harvey Oswald himself. This is a guy that was raised under the most peculiar, weird circumstances anybody can imagine. He was in and out of dozens of schools. His mom was a nut, and she raised him alone like a nut. And he shows those tendencies. I mean, he joined the Marines, the military, early to get out of that circumstance. He took on Russian philosophies and Russian beliefs very early on in the Marine Corps. He got himself, everybody talks about him being a secret agent in the Marine Corps, and shit. I mean, the guy shot himself literally to get out of the Marine Corps, which everybody overlooks. He finally, because of his perspective on things, and that he was destined to bigger and better things and hated the country that had treated him so poorly and not recognized his true worth. He moved to Russia, got a Russian wife over there, and then quickly saw what Russia was about. I got news for people. And then I hear people that, I'm not a Putin lover, but Russia's just as bad, if not worse than we are. He discovered that. He came back to the United States. This is a guy, a secret agent that couldn't drive a car. His Quaker landlady had to teach him how to drive. She got him a job at the Texas School Book Depository for $1 an hour at minimum wage. He wouldn't even have been able to get the job himself. He'd never succeeded at anything in his life, including what a lot of people refer to, it hardly ever gets mentioned, the Rosetta Stone in the Kennedy assassination, which is there was a right-wing John Birch, former general living in the Dallas area, that Lee Harvey Oswald hated because the guy went around talking about bad things about Cuba, because that was going to be his next destination. He tried the United States, didn't work. He tried Russia, didn't work. He was going to emigrate to Cuba next. And this guy's, this General Walker was sitting in his study in a fully illuminated window doing his taxes one night, would have been the spring before the Kennedy assassination. Somebody took a shot at him, would have killed him, but the little wood frame in the window deflected the bullet and Walker survived, fortunately for him. And the bullet was matched to Lee Harvey Oswald's gun, the rifle that was used to kill John Kennedy. Nobody knows that. He told Marina about it. She told authorities about it. I think he even wrote a note about it, for God's sake. That was his first nut-wing attempt at assassination, which, like everything else, ended in failure. And so time moves on. He's still trying to get to Cuba. He can't get down there. He goes down to the Mexican embassy to try to get passage to Cuba. That's an interesting story in and of itself. More cover your ass stuff with the intel agencies. They don't want you to know about that because it was completely screwed up down there. But he's down in Mexico. They announced the motorcade route and Kennedy's visit. The route going not the motorcade route, but his visit to Dallas. So he goes back after failing down in Mexico City, goes back to Dallas, and reading a day-old newspaper at the Texas School Book Depository, he discovers that Kennedy is going to motorcade right by his building. My God, it was handed to him on a silver platter. Here's somebody that was self-educated. Remember what I said about him being thrown out of school, but he spent a lot of time in libraries reading books of his own choosing and stuff like that. And it's almost certain, this is conjecture on my part, but he believed, similar to Charlie Manson, that if somebody would start this thing, which is how revolutions start, if somebody would start it, it would snowball and he could be the next Castro. He could be the next Che Guevara. All he had to do was kill Kennedy, the sitting president of the United States. He sat up there in that sixth floor window of the Texas School Book Depository. Now, I haven't been in the sixth floor, but I've been in the fifth floor and looked out the window, looked where that motorcade was at. Jose, I could have thrown a rock out the window and hit Kennedy. I mean, it didn't take any great marksmanship. It didn't take any magic bullet, nothing like that. It did not take an extraordinary shot on a target moving away from you, which anybody that's ever hunted a pheasant in my part of the world knows is the easiest shot that there is. The magic bullet was not magic at all. That's been disproven to no doubt about it. It was not pristine. There's one thing when you analyze ballistics that anybody that's serious about analyzing ballistics can tell you is there's absolutely no absolute. I mean, people get shot, body parts fly off, bullets ricochet, things happen that are kind of inexplicable to a certain extent. And that's what happened with this bullet that passed through Connolly's body and through Kennedy's neck right before the third bullet blew his head off. And then Lee Harvey Oswald in the sixth floor of the Texas School Book Depository. Some people think he wasn't even responsible for it. Everybody's horror and dumbstruck over Kennedy getting shot out in front of their building. What does Oswald do? He leaves. He's the only guy in the building that picks up and leaves. And he told investigators, and I think in the police station before he was killed, that, he didn't figure there'd be any more work that day. What does he do? Goes to his rooming house where, again, he failed at his marriage. This is a guy that can't even hold a marriage together. He's living in a room, basically, like a secret agent would, all by himself. He picks up his gun and his jacket, starts off on foot, has no means of escaping or fleeing from the deed that he's just done, is stopped by a police officer, J.D. Tippett, on a street and panics, pulls his gun, shoots the guy dead right there in the street in front of witnesses, ducks inside of a theater a short distance away. Again, what does he do? Pulls out his damn gun when the cops try to stop him and says, well, good old boys all carry our guns or whatever. And the gun misfires and he's put in the Dallas clink. And then, of course, we all know what happens with Jack Ruby and so on. But anyway, that's my take on it. And again, you can tell I've read into it a lot, and you guys can pull that apart any way you want to. But I'm certain that that's exactly what happened. And if it wasn't that, Seymour Hersh would have told us.
Well, okay, so there's actually quite a lot there that I don't know where to actually kind of begin. But first of all, I appreciate hearing that because, doing this show, I've been exposed to a lot of the quote other side of things where I never get a coherent answer as to exactly what the other side is. So, for example, I had on Eric Hunley and Mark Rubert from Untold Stories of America. And it's funny because they're the inverse of you, where, you're very much, pro-Palestinian, the Shireen Abu Akleh is like, as you said,
well, I'm Shireen Abu Akleh pro anyway, that's for sure.
Right. Yeah. They are, I don't know actually about her, but they're very, very, very pro-Israeli. But they also have done a lot of work in terms of the Kennedy assassination. And they have, done series after series on why it was a conspiracy. And so
it's a major industry. Huge. They're not alone. multi-million-dollar. That's one thing about it that's really remarkable. People don't understand that. I mean, it's a major, these conspiracies are a major industry. You're right.
So let me get this straight, though. I guess one place to begin is you believe that the Kennedy files, when revealed, or if revealed, would not show a conspiracy that the government killed Kennedy, but rather that it would show the CIA's incompetence, or at least, I guess, the intelligence agency's incompetence to track down this Lee Harvey Oswald, and their incompetence in actually protecting the president and keeping him alive.
I think that's why they originally asked them to be sealed this long. It's a little strongly the way that you worded it. I'm not. There may be something in those records, Jose. I don't know. Who knows? I'm not going to speak with absolutism about that. I'm just saying nothing has thus far, but there may be. But that's where I'm at on it. Yep.
So now let's look at Kennedy's cabinet, and you look at people like Alan Dulles.
Yeah, being on the Warren Commission. Yeah, that was wrong. No doubt about it. Yeah, I agree with that.
Right. Okay. So, shouldn't that right there kind of like set off some red flag of, distrust towards the loan, or at least the fact that, shouldn't that kind of give you like, okay, well, there definitely was more to this than just what the official narrative is?
Well, for people that don't know now, Alan Dulles was, this guy, he was the, what would you call him? Maybe the John Bolton of the era. I mean, this guy was put on the Warren Commission. He was a mole that was reporting back. I mean, nothing good about that guy being on there. But here's what I would say, Jose, without breaking this down specifically, but it goes to a lot of conspiracy type stuff. And when it comes to the killing of the assassination of JFK, is everything you said about Dulles true? Yes. But it's just, who else had a motive to kill Kennedy? Lyndon Johnson. You know who has a motive to kill every president that ever lived? Every vice president. Why? They ascend to the presidency. Does that mean that the assassinations have been carried out by the vice president? No. Did the CIA have reason to kill John Kennedy? Hell yes. He told the CIA and the world that he was going to break the CIA into a million pieces. But a motive and an opportunity even does not result. It does not mean that they actually did it. Did the mafia have reason to kill? Oh, absolutely. My God. And Robert Kennedy, by the way, you talk about being a major pain in their ass. More than that, they absolutely had motive to kill Kennedy, but did they? I mean, look at it. Hell no. Oswald did it. I mean, God, and he couldn't conspire with anybody. He couldn't conspire to get a free lunch. Oswald did. The guy was a loser with a capital L. So, that's my response to that. And you can go all through those types of things. I'll agree with you every single time, but the dot just, it's not connected. I mean,
So what would you say then about Lee Harvey Oswald dying to Jack Ruby, right? Because Jack Ruby shoots Lee Harvey Oswald, I think,
yep,
what, like 24, 48 hours after he's actually arrested,
yep.
right? I mean, some would say, and I would say this actually is what I believe, right? It's a way of shutting up Oswald from talking about how he was a patsy and talking about how the conspiracy was actually done. What would you say? Was that just so the CIA could cover up their incompetence, or what would you say to that?
No, I would say you're right, Jose. I mean, you guys are right. Ruby did do that. He admitted doing that, but for a slightly different reason. He didn't want Jackie to have to go through a trial. This is a guy that was overly emotional. He was Meshuggah. He wasn't quite right in the head. He didn't want to see this beautiful young president with those children of the United States, and he got all blubbery and worked up and that type of thing, have to sit through a trial where what you just described would come out, where it would be talked about Oswald blowing his head off and all that kind of stuff. Ruby was a ne'er-do-well strip club owner, small-time hustler down there in Dallas. He was used to taking matters into his own hand always. He would bounce people out of his own place. He was a thug. He had a gun in his pocket. It was a great coincidence that he was even on scene when Oswald came out of that elevator an hour and a half late. And he pulled the gun out of his pocket impulsively, and he was an impulsive dude, Jack Ruby was, and he killed Oswald to silence him. I mean, you're right. That's why he did it, but for a slightly different reason.
But I find that hard to believe, because why would a mafioso gang guy who runs a strip club care about what the president's wife and children have to go through?
Well, that's just if you, again, look at it and look at the Warren Commission testimony from his roommate, he was extremely distraught over that. Not like, and I was alive at that time. I remember seeing my parents, and I've talked about people, not like your normal person would be distraught. This guy, I mean, he was out there, and Ruby was a violent type of a person. He just took matters into his own hands like he had done so many times. And again, he supposedly had the secret. From the time that he was arrested, he began to formulate a defense that maybe there was something else to this, and he could never put it together. He could never offer up any kind of a link to Oswald himself and a conspiracy or anything like that up until the time that he died, just wanting to get a new trial. I mean, he just wanted to get heard again, and he just wasn't able to do it. The thing with Ruby that I'll say that I think probably points to the fact that this was happenstance was, again, Oswald wanted to change of clothes and that type of thing. He actually came down in the elevator to be transported almost an hour late. Media had been standing around cooling their heels, the TV cameras and reporters in the basement of the Dallas police station all that time. Ruby, meantime, had gone to a Western Union station just a walking distance away from the police station to wire one of his strippers a little bit of money. So it's time stamped. We know for sure that he was there at the Western Union doing that. And Ruby was such a weird cat. He had some dachshunds, and that he just loved, these dogs. As a matter of fact, he called one Sheba, his favorite, his wife. And I'm not so sure the dude was kidding. I mean, that's kind of the way that he felt about her. Well, he left Sheba in the car while he went down there to commit the crime of the century, obviously with a pretty good chance of being apprehended on the spot if this was part of a plan to silence Oswald. He left Sheba in the car by herself. And everybody that was interviewed that knew anything about Ruby said he would never do that. So again, I've got these little Rosetta Stones that people, they don't often think of. And the final thing that I'll say about all of this, unless you want to talk some more about it, Jose, is that to me, the overlooked thing, and so many things are overlooked on major stories. The thing that's overlooked here is the impact one nut, two nuts can have on world history because of a gun. Oswald got his mail order from an NRA magazine. Who knows where the hell Ruby got his 38 snub nose revolver, his special or whatever. But you can change the world with a gun, and it's being changed in our society and our country every day in schools and circumstances, these damn guns. And that's what I would point a finger to more than anything, the gun and the nut connection. And that's what I call Oswald. He was a nut with a gun, Jose.
What do you think, Kainer? Before we move on the subject, go ahead, Kainer.
I would ask for your, George, for your evaluation of the Warren Commission report, because Jose had already mentioned that Alan Dulles had been appointed to that commission, and many others, I think, that were opposed to JFK's policy in the White House. And I think one of the more important things that JFK had done towards the end of his administration was that national executive order he had signed in, which was basically to take out 1,000 of the advisors that we had at Vietnam at the time. I think there were about 15,000 that he had put in there, and 1,000 were to be taken out by next month after he issued the order. And by 65, I think all of them were going to be taken out. And, people have said, well, this is one of the reasons why he was killed, because he opposed Vietnam. He opposed the war hawks in his administration that were trying to fight all these wars around the world. So what's your evaluation on that, on the Warren Commission report?
Well, I think the Warren Commission, in my mind, was flawed in what it produced, how it produced it, who was involved. You mentioned Dulles, but I believe their finding actually was correct. And again, I look at it a little bit differently, but kind of like you are. I think the reason, and I don't know why people don't want to look at it this way, but the reason JFK was killed by Oswald was because JFK was not because of Vietnam, but because of Cuba. And because of the Bay of Pigs fiasco and the fact that JFK was hard on Cuba and the Cuban Missile Crisis and all that kind of stuff. And that's why Oswald, in his fevered mind, hated Kennedy and killed him there in Dallas. That's the historical perspective. But yeah, did the people that you're talking about have reason to kill Kennedy? Sure, there was a motive there. The blob, the military industrial complex, and the CIA. Those were the people that wanted in Vietnam. Those were the people behind the curtain pushing that thing. And Kennedy was resisting that, wasn't moving quickly enough. Hell, they even called him a coward. This is the guy that was the PT-109 World War II hero. I mean, he volunteered to be on a PT boat, which was just looking to get blown apart, basically, out there in the Pacific. They did get rammed. Went into the water. He put the strap of a Mae West of a fellow sailor in his teeth and swam to safety to an island with this guy. So they thought they were going to back John Kennedy down, but this guy had cojones, boy. I mean, the size of church bells. He was not going to be backed down by these guys like other presidents before and since certainly have been, and they hated him for it. They had a motive to kill him. Did they? No, they didn't. Oswald did.
Well, George, I think we'll move on from this subject. You've definitely given me a lot to chew on. You've given the chat a lot to chew on. The chat is like freaking out. I love it though. I remain unconvinced that this was a lone gun theory, but that's the beauty of America.
Two books before we leave. Case Closed by Gerald Posner. Check that out. It's a much easier read. Or Reclaiming History by Vincent Bugliosi. It is the book is literally this thick, and it's got a CD with it as well. And it's some of the most, the best, certainly sourced and researched, in-depth work on the JFK assassination you'll ever find. Reclaiming History by Vincent Bugliosi, and it's a page turner. He's the guy that wrote Helter Skelter. He's the guy that convicted Charlie Manson. He's the LA prosecutor that got his claim to fame that way, and that's a great book. So check those out and let me know what you think of those.
Actually, you know what? Wait, there's one more thing. Actually, Oliver Stone. And you brought up Seymour Hersh. We recently interviewed Oliver Stone. I don't know if you saw this, but
I did a little bit of it. Not an Oliver Stone fan, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah, you're not an Oliver Stone fan. Okay, no problem. Yeah, okay. I see my friend Bula is in the chat here. Good stuff. Anyway, so Oliver Stone on Seymour Hersh. It's funny because I asked him about Seymour Hersh, I asked him about Nord Stream and his thoughts on Nord Stream, and he said, he definitely believes the United States had a role when it comes to Nord Stream. Now, he said you have to be careful with Seymour, though. He said he knows Hersh, he knows Seymour, they get along. He said that when Seymour wrote Dark Side of Camelot, right? You aware of this, right?
Barely. Yeah, I've heard of it.
So Seymour wrote this book called Dark Side of Camelot, which was about the Kennedy presidency, right? Not necessarily about the assassination, but about like the presidency. And he was, writing about, why the Kennedy presidency wasn't actually all that good and all the dark things they did.
Oh, yeah.
Dark Side of Camelot, right? Well, Oliver Stone said you actually have to be careful there because some of the sources that Seymour Hersh was quoting from and using when it came to Dark Side of Camelot were some CIA insider people that actually his sources turned out to be wrong, or the information he had turned out to be wrong. And I'm not saying that to say Oliver Stone is definitely right on this or Seymour Hersh was definitely wrong on this. I'm simply saying that as much as I respect Seymour Hersh, and you're probably right about what you're saying, that if Seymour Hersh had some really juicy info on the Kennedy assassination, he would definitely release it. I don't think it's a strong enough argument to say that, well, if there was a smoking gun, someone like Seymour Hersh would have found it already. I think there are things in this world and in this country that have happened that are so deep that people have already taken those secrets to the grave. I mean, if I was involved in assassinating a president, ain't no way that's ever going to leave my lips. And I would make sure nobody else knew. But I don't know. What are your thoughts on Oliver Stone saying, watch out, for Seymour's sources? Because he also said that about Nord Stream. Like he said, like, I don't doubt America had a role in Nord Stream, but you just have to be careful with Seymour's sources. And that was a shock to me to hear him say that, because I was like, damn, I thought he was going to praise Seymour. And so that was the first time I heard criticism of Seymour Hersh coming from somebody I respect that I thought was just going to praise him.
Here's what I would say, Jose. Go with Seymour Hersh. And when it comes to Oliver Stone, what you're describing there reminds me of, and his name is going to escape me. Of course, Matt Taibbi came from the Rolling Stone, but he didn't write this. It was a peer of his there at the Rolling Stone many years ago. But what he said was, why does everybody get their political opinions and historical perspective from a guy that plays a guitar? And he was talking about Bob Dylan or any number of people. He says, why don't we get those opinions from circus jugglers? And I thought, my God, that's exactly right. And Oliver Stone is a perfect example. He ain't no Seymour Hersh. The Gannon thing down there in New Orleans in his movie, I think the only thing Oliver Stone got right in that movie was the date of the assassination. Everything that's in there is empirically proven to not be false, including the magic bullet, the thing with the zigzagging movement. That's what Jim Garrison's case really was based on. That's why the jury was able to come back in half an hour. They didn't take into account the inset of the jump seat that Connolly was seated on, and how the trajectory of the bullet then was possible to do exactly what it did. Now, Oliver Stone, to his credit, is a marvelous movie maker. That's what he is. But the danger with people like Oliver Stone is that they have done research, surveys, that most Americans get their view, their perspective, their knowledge of history from movies. Well, my God, it's Hollywood. I mean, it's fake. That was one of my main bitches back in the day and always has been with Ronald Reagan and also Donald Trump. My God, you don't elect people whose job it is to make you believe that the unreal is real. Those aren't your sources. Those aren't the people that you go to for information. Those people are the ones that are in charge of the mirror and the house of mirrors that we're living in. We elected Reagan, he was a B movie actor. Actors fake people out. They make you believe that there's something that they're not. Trump also a reality television show host. He was about as bad at that as Reagan was a movie actor. And you don't vote for people like that to be your leader, to be your president, for God's sake. But we did, and we have. And that's who we are. And when we talk about Oliver Stone, I mean, I'll talk about his movies. And my God, The Doors was a great movie. I mean, he's a great filmmaker, but he ain't the guy that I'm going to go to for my information on the Kennedy assassination or anything else like that. I'm going to go to Seymour or Chris Hedges or, people like that. That's who I follow.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Don't watch movies now.
Enjoy them for fiction. Yeah.
Well, so then let me ask you this, though. So then what do you think about 9/11?
9/11, and this again, some of these things are tight, and you're probably doing this on purpose. You're talking touching a little bit on the Robert Kennedy thing, but again, is there a story behind the story? Yeah, it's the fact that the Saudis were on the planes and how they were spirited out of the country and all that stuff is very interesting. It's like Trump and these classified documents. I don't give a shit about the classified documents or him hiding them or that being against the law or whatever. I want to know what's in those documents. I want to know why Trump chose to take those particular documents. He had to choose some. Why did he choose those? People aren't talking about that very much. When it comes to 9/11, I want to talk about the issues of, about who was behind it, how they're our allies, how the government had a role in that. I'm interested in that. Did they fly the planes into the towers? Yeah. Did that bring them down? Yeah. And another example of that is there are people out there in the conspiracy world that want to believe that missiles were flown into the Pentagon. Shit, they found the tail with the plane tail number on it in the Pentagon after the plane crashed in there. What the hell are people thinking of? I mean, that's what I think about 9/11. I ain't going to jump into the weeds on it being an inside job and being brought down from inside by the spook sphere and all that. Yeah. That's just not where I'm at. But I would like to look at those other issues.
Well, just so you know where I'm at, I don't know where you are at. I pretty much, the planes definitely flew in. It wasn't, at least I don't think it was bombs, although I've seen people say there might have been bombs, explosions. There's a video of like firemen talking about the buildings coming down, and the way they describe it was like boom, 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 boom. But I've also seen demolition experts say actually that's how buildings are designed to fall because, if you have skyscrapers they need to come down, they have to be designed to fall in a stacking way so they don't cause lots of damage. But I mean, the big thing that, Kynan and I were involved in was this releasing of the 28 pages that what you said proved that the Saudis actually had a bigger role in 9/11 than we previously thought. And also that our intelligence agencies knew that Saudi Arabia was involved and kept that hidden. I mean, this means George Bush knew that Saudi Arabia was involved, and we worked with the families of the victims of 9/11 to get these 28 pages. I mean, this was some of my early activism work. We did this around 2016 or so, and 2015, 2016, and then Obama tried to veto it. And thankfully, the Congress, lobbied in part by the families of the victims of 9/11, were able to overturn that veto. So the 28 pages would still be released and that the JASTA bill would be passed, meaning that the families could now hold the state sponsors of terrorism accountable, meaning they could sue the Saudi Arabians. I don't know where that is now, but that's kind of where we are now. And yeah.
Well, I would also mention that you and I had worked with Bill Binney.
Yeah, I like Bill Binney.
Yeah. I'm glad you know him. But we had worked with him extensively during the lead up to the Trump election, where he had worked with VIPs, the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, which proved that physically no hack could have taken place on the DNC. It was absolutely impossible.
Correct.
The transfer rate was way too high. It indicated that most likely, someone took a flash drive and just leaked it from the inside.
Yes.
So we worked with him on that, but he also had some things to say about 9/11 because he had left, he had left in 2001, just after. And he had said with the help of some of his colleagues that he had developed something called Thin Thread. And Jose, you may know more about the specific details of it, but basically the whole gist of it was that it could find out, who terrorists were, who criminals were, without giving up important private information. Just like which is what the NSA does today. They have absolutely no filter on the information they collect. They can be collecting all kinds of private things about us. But with Thin Thread, that wouldn't have been possible because all of that would have been encrypted. And one thing he said about it is if the head of the NSA at the time, what was his name? Michael Hayden, if he had improved it, then attacks like 9/11 would not have been possible.
No, if he had adopted it, that was the thing.
Right.
Also, I see people asking about Building 7. We'll come back to Building 7. I don't click away. We'll talk about Building 7. I promise you. I promise you that. So anyway, it was the case. So Bill Binney had this thing called Thin Thread. It was this, what the NSA uses now is a program called Trailblazer. And Trailblazer just massively collects all data, all messages, all texts, all phone records, everything, right? Thin Thread used a unique approach where instead of getting all of that data, it was looking at metadata. In other words, data of data.
Yeah.
Right. And then it didn't matter what people were saying. It mattered who was talking to who and when. And that mattered more. And that was Binney's kind of algorithm to figuring out how you can find terrorists. And he believes that if Michael Hayden had adopted his program, and the reason Michael Hayden denied it was because it was too cheap to make. I'm not kidding. He said, no. You're telling me I only have to ask the Congress for like $7 million? No. I want to ask them for billions. So that's why Trailblazer was more expensive. But if Thin Thread had been adopted, Binney believes 9/11 would have been prevented because it would have, and because they also turned it on actually for a test, and then they were able to find some criminals even before it went to fully, be in what the NSA uses now. Anyway, all of this to say, and the reason why I did bring up 9/11 after JFK is just, to what extent do you think our government is involved in, what's the way I put it? How am I trying to, I don't know how to word what I'm trying to say here. To what extent is our government involved in, I guess, conspiracy, or what people would call deemed conspiracy, where they're trying to make these events to try and control us or manipulate us, or like one of the things that our organization, the LaRouche organization, Lyndon LaRouche had his people leafleting in 2001 in August and September, before 9/11. This is like true story. This is real. I can get you the stuff. He had a leaflet that we were giving out saying, "Stop the next Reichstag fire." And you know what the Reichstag fire was, George?
No.
Okay, so in 1933, Hitler needed a reason to have executive control or executive authority. So what they did was he staged a burning of a library called the Reichstag. And he then claimed that they were under attack by, like, what was it? You know the story behind the Reichstag?
Oh, they claimed that the communists had burned the building or whatever.
Yeah, and so this gave Hitler full executive authority because they were under attack. And so we had a leaflet saying, "Stop Bush from starting another Reichstag fire," to, basically give Bush another reason to trigger martial law, basically, and come into executive. Because if the country's under terrorist attack, then the president gets, executive authority. The Congress gets absolved for X amount of days.
They get the Patriot Act.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And so when 9/11 happened, Lyndon LaRouche was on the radio with Jack Stockwell, and Jack Stockwell gives him the news. And then Lyndon LaRouche says they're going to blame Osama bin Laden on this. They're just what they're going to do, even before any official reports came out, right? And so, Lynn was able to kind of forecast something was going to happen that, was going to give Bush some kind of executive authority. What do you make of just the government role altogether in terms of world events and conspiracy? I guess that's what I'm asking.
It's a great question, and I guess I would sum it up this way. And we may have talked about it briefly when you were on my show, but I cite all the time. Now, it's kind of corny, but it really drives home the point that I try to make. I cite this scene in the movie Casino. We talked about movies. I don't know if you guys have seen Casino, but Robert De Niro finds out that his slot machines, his big jackpot slot machines, have just given up 3 jackpots in a row. And he goes and confronts the casino jackpot manager, basically the slot machine manager. And he says, my God, didn't you see that this coming? Didn't you know that what the mathematical possibility of 2 machines being hit right in a row were? Why didn't you pull the machines after the second jackpot? And then the guy couldn't explain it to him. And then he said, do you know what the mathematical probability of 3 machines? It just cannot happen. The guy says, well, it's a casino. People have got to win once in a while. And De Niro looks at him and says, now, by God, you are insulting me. You're either too dumb if you believe that, or you're in on it. And I look at the government and the way that these situations that we've talked about, and I've always kind of been on the side of, and the JFK with the cover up following that's the same way. It's because these people are too dumb. They couldn't protect JFK. They don't want to be found out for being the frauds that they are, so they cover their asses and so on and so on. 9/11 and all of these things. I tend to think that they're too dumb, but now I'm beginning to look at it and think some of these things are also because they're in on it. Maybe both of these things. What percentage is one and what percentage is the other? I can't tell you for sure, but that's the way that I look at 9/11. They should have known. Another historical, a little piece that I love to share with people. Richard Clark was the terrorism czar under George W. And after 9/11, he was summoned to the White House, and he said, well, what for? What are they going to do? Well, they're drawing up plans to invade Iraq. And he looked at him and said, Iraq? What the hell for? Why would we invade Iraq? He says, you might as well invade Mexico. Why are we invading Iraq? The Iraqis, Saddam Hussein, they didn't fly the planes into the Twin Towers. What's that all about? Well, I don't know. Was W and Cheney and Rumsfeld and all those guys, were they too dumb to know that, or were they in on it? Maybe a combination of both. And the fact that W wanted to make up some lost ground with the embarrassment that his father had in the first Gulf War. Maybe that played a role in it as well. But that's the other little historical snippet that I like to, I don't know if that explains, but it's kind of a fun way of looking at it. That's how I look at it, Jose.
Like I said, George, all I care is about how you look at it. We don't have to agree on all these things. I'm just, interested in
are they too dumb or are they in on it? Yeah.
Building. Okay. So like I said, building. Oh, you were going to say something?
Yeah. Well, no, thanks, George, for what you had to say. But I think it's important that we keep bringing up this question of the documents, because really people have to demand that this be released. And,
I'm with you.
Yeah. And I don't know if you saw RFK's comments on the Sean Hannity show recently, but he had talked about this story about when he was young, when he had just gotten back from his school. His father was on the phone with someone from the CIA, and and right after the assassination of his brother, and he said, did your people do this? And then he asked the same question to the Cuban Bay of Pigs guy that they had knew, and someone else from the CIA. But we don't know whether it's true or not. But regardless, I think we have to demand a release of these documents and actually take action, to get to the truth. And that's how we'll really know at this point. I don't know what you think about that, Jose. But
I think we're all on the same page on that. And George, I promised we have to ask Building 7. What do you think happened?
Now you're getting a little bit above my pay grade when it comes to Building 7. I know there are conspiracies about the way the different buildings came down and were they connected and all that type of thing, but I can't really speak to Building 7.
No, that's the best answer you could give, honestly. Yeah. I don't know. That's what we respect people who say we don't know. I prefer people who say they don't know than people who try to make something up. So
yeah. Now, Vault 7 with Julian Assange, I could talk about that a little bit. But the other thing that I was reminded of when you were talking, whenever you talk about RFK, and we're running out of time, so here, I kind of want to. This is a point that I did want to make. I'm not a big RFK supporter for this reason. Now, I'm a good old boy. I'm a farmer. We used to be called redneck hippies in this part of the country when I was a kid. If I was RFK Jr. and some Palestinian nut like Sirhan had blown the back of my father's head off in a kitchen in Los Angeles, you don't want me elected president overseeing the circumstance in Israel and Palestine. Now, that's just me. That's the way that I am. I used to say the same thing, Jose, about John McCain when he wanted to be president of the United States. I said, nah, I ain't voting for that guy. You don't want a guy that's been in a prisoner of war camp at the hands of captors for, my God, 6 or 7 years, some unbelievable amount of time with that backlog of PTSD and history and stuff like that. You don't want to make a guy like that president of the United States. Why? Because you wouldn't want me there. Because the first thing I'd want to do to my last dying breath is to whoop the shit out of the guys that did that to me. I mean, that's the way I felt about John McCain. It's also the way that I feel about Robert Kennedy. Now, I'm not saying that he's that way at all. I'm just telling you a way that I would be, the way that I understand and feel things. And I look at it that way and I'm thinking, nah, probably pass. Better than Trump, better than Biden. Yeah, but I think we can do better. I think we got to raise the bar a little bit, but that's my perspective.
Okay. Well, I guess just to kind of end this off here, I put this in the title, so we have to talk about it. We can make this very quickly. We'll make it into a question. George, if you had a spare $250,000, would you take it to go see the wreck of the Titanic by going into this minivan-sized submarine and then getting stuck down there?
If I had an extra $250,000, would I choose to spend it that way?
Yeah.
Not me. No.
That's the situation we have right now. There's I was telling you a little bit about this before the show. There's a submarine right now, rinky dinky submarine that's made with like parts of like video game controller and like parts that somebody got at I don't know what's the Bass Pro fishing shop or something. And like, I mean it, yeah. So, you know, and this guy thought he could compete with the U.S. Navy, because the U.S. Navy doesn't even have lots of submarines that can go down 1,300 or 3,000 meters into the ocean, which is about 2 miles down or something like that. And right now there's a group of billionaires. So it's like 3 billionaires and his son, and then 2 of the crew members who are stuck down there. They lost, and there's been like a search rescue going on for the last 72 hours of people trying to figure out where this submarine is. But one of the problems right now is that even if they find where the submarine is, assuming it didn't implode, assuming that it actually held together, they don't know how they're going to lift it up because it's so deep and there's immense pressure. It's like millions of pounds weighing down on this one submarine. They don't know if balloons are going to be able to lift it up, and they don't even know how to get balloons on the thing. So, you know.
You know, the thing that came to my mind, and you're all over this, and if I had $250,000 extra dollars, and I hope somebody out there does, support Jose Vega and his actions, what you do. Because I mentioned before we even went on, I'm very jaded now about the electoral process, electing Robert Kennedy Jr. or Cornel West, who I really like. I don't know if they're going to be able to get anything done in time to save us from climate war and healthcare on this globe. But what you're doing, Jose, those actions that you have, that is something new. That's different. We need to do more of that. Where you show up at these propaganda events and say, well, I must be in the wrong room. Wait a minute. I mean, that is a great thing that you're doing. That is a real eye opener. I hope someday that you can do one of those live on national television and walk in there and say, well, hell, I must be in the wrong place. I thought this was freedom of the press. I thought this was journalism that we were talking about here. I thought this was an open forum where people were going to be able to talk to their legislator or those types of things. That's really great. But back to your point about that submarine, that really strikes home with me. Seymour Hersh, he says one of the biggest reasons that we know that the United States blew up that Nord Stream down there was because of the depth that it was at and the sophisticated type of machinery, explosives, and ability that it took to do it. And there ain't many that can do it. You can count them on one hand. The country's capable of doing that. As a matter of fact, you might be able to count it on one finger. So the circumstances are strikingly similar between trying to raise that submarine that you're talking about or going down to Nord Stream and blowing that up. Of course, the cover story the cover your ass cover story that was planted in the New York Times, I think, was that some dissident Ukrainians on a SS Minnow fishing boat or whatever went over the side and set these explosives down there on the seabed floor. My God, you talk about insulting my intelligence, for God's sake. So that's what Seymour says, and that's what I think of when you talk about that sub.
So let's end this off on a positive note here, Jordan. So you said you're not into electoral politics. A lot of
I'm getting jaded. Yeah.
What do you think then we should be doing?
I've thought about this, and I've talked about it a lot on my podcast. I hate to put it in this perspective, but think of it this way: the Rosetta Stones. We talked about that. The two Rosetta Stones for me are the New Deal with FDR and the Vietnam War. Both of those things were brought about not electorally, not by voting someone, not by a town hall meeting, nothing like that. FDR was an oligarch. He was a Roosevelt, for God's sake. The only reason that he gave us the New Deal and changed the country dramatically was because of the protesters, the communists, the socialists, those people that were in the street. And he told his oligarchy buddies, basically, we got to give these people something in the form of a New Deal or they're going to take it. And why did that take place? Because people were starving top to bottom in this country because of the Depression. Everybody was suffering. So he had to change course. The Vietnam War, kind of the same type of thing. Everybody had a kid on their block coming home in a box, to quote that great song out of Woodstock. And people said, no mas, no more, no more. Chris Hedges talks about how empty city school buses were parked around the White House by Nixon to protect him from these protesters, from these people that were, looking like they were going to take it. And Nixon turned to Kissinger and said, Henry, they're coming to get us. I mean, that's the type of thing, that's the motivation that we've got to have. But things have got to get really bad for everyone before that type of thing happens. And everyone isn't suffering to the degree that the constituency on my show, and particularly your show, Jose, they're not, everybody isn't suffering like that. Now, here's the chilling part of it. For everybody to suffer like that, it may not be a depression. It may not be a Vietnam War. For everybody to suffer to the extent that to actually cause change in this country, it may come in form of what I call the big three on the PBG: climate, war, and healthcare. And unfortunately, when it comes to climate and war, if those are the things, and nuclear wars, what we're talking about here coming out of Ukraine, and if those are the types of things that cause the suffering on a high enough level to change things the way they did with the New Deal and the Vietnam War, we could be screwed and tattooed, Jose, because we'll all be dead. I mean, climate's going to get us all in 20 years. A nuclear bomb strike could get us in 20 minutes. And yeah, there'll be change, but it's too late. That's not what can motivate change in this country. Let's hope it's something else that will come on the radar screen and cause people to get in the streets and do something. And maybe it could begin with when they bring Julian Assange over here with a hood over his head and a cargo plane and before a hanging judge in Virginia. Maybe people will get in the street and start some change that way because of the huge injustice being done to a journalist and our First Amendment rights in this country. I would prefer it would be that rather than a climate catastrophe or a nuclear holocaust.
Can I say something? Thanks for all of that, George. But I wanted to end on this note because you had mentioned Daniel Ellsberg as being one of
man, he's greatest. Yeah,
one of your personal heroes and someone to follow. And he recently passed, and I think it would be right to say something about him.
Yes.
And about his work. And one of the things that stands out to me when I think of when we do these kinds of interventions is what would you do for your country? And when he was asked, would you go to prison to stop this war, the Vietnam War? I think that was probably one of the most inspirational things that any citizen could have said. and someone that people should consider and actually follow through in action. So if there's something you could say about him.
Oh, well said. And again, it brings me back to Jose, because I watch Jose do those, and I think, oh my God, it's almost cringeworthy. Like, God, he's standing up. He's saying this. Shit, they're wrestling him to the floor. Hell, they're going to take him to jail. Man, that's cojones. Well, look at Daniel Ellsberg, for God's sake. He knew that if he just told people what he was aware of from working at the Rand Corporation and those documents that he'd seen, nobody would pay attention to him. He wouldn't get coverage. He wouldn't be platformed like these indie left people that I'm talking about in America today. Instead, he stole them. He took those documents and he gave them and got them published, and he changed the world. Most importantly, what Daniel Ellsberg did, his epitaph should be this: he saved the lives of thousands, maybe tens of thousands of American young men and some women dying in Vietnam by doing that. And he knew that he faced espionage charges, most likely. He knew that he probably, as a matter of fact, they had plans, they had designs to put him in prison for the rest of his life. But he saved tens of thousands of lives on the U.S. side doing that, maybe hundreds of thousands of lives on the Vietnamese and the eastern side of things. My God Almighty, who else can go to their grave except the great Daniel Ellsberg and say, undoubtedly, empirically, I saved tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of lives. My God, that makes an old man weepy. And so when I see a young man like you guys and see like Jose standing up at these meetings, that kind of gets me a little teary at times too. It's wonderful stuff. Keep it up. Go get it, man.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, George. I think that's a great place to end it, ladies and gentlemen. This has been Declaring Independence with our friend George. George, where can people find you?
The easiest way, I tell people all the time, just go to podcastbygeorge.com. The icons to subscribe to my live streams for Facebook and YouTube are there. You just click on them, sign up there. And then if you just want to hear audio, like long form, like we just did here, iTunes and Spotify and places like that, there's icons for that too. That's the easiest way to find me. You can search me, but it's not real easy, because Podcast by George, I found out after I named the show, Jose, a very generic term. I mean, podcast will bring up a million returns. George will bring you up to the Prince of England. I mean, it's very hard to search Podcast by George and find me, but just go to podcastbygeorge.com and you're there.
Okay, great. Well, if you get down a conspiracy rabbit hole, folks, just go to George and he'll pull you out of it. So. All right, George, I don't have an end screen. All I do is I just hit end broadcast.
That's cool.